Okay, we've got a lot to go through in a short amount of time, so we'll get started and people can continue to join. So again, for those that didn't hear before, welcome everyone. This is Digital Ninjas Maximising Your Tax Appeal webinar. We're going to go through the tools, tactics, and strategies for the critical fundraising window that is end of financial year. The mission of this webinar is to help you optimize performance for that final stretch. We want to empower charities with a data-driven battle plan for the end of financial year period. By analysing real-world investment scenarios ranging from core search and social acquisition to high-growth awareness strategies, we will equip you with the tools to optimise budget allocation, sharpen audience targeting, and maximise return on ad spend leading up to June 30. Now there is a AI generated bobblehead image of myself here, but I am Fiona. I am the head of strategy here at Digital Ninjas. Showing my age, I have a 20-year career in digital. I have 12 years experience working with not-for-profits, and I'm obviously quite strategy focused, and I also undertake a lot of the training in Digital Ninjas, which I can see some of you in the audience have had some of my training. So awesome to see you here. Digital Ninjas has been operating for about 12 years now. We specialize in digital fundraising and communications. Over those 12 years, we have worked with hundreds of not-for-profit organizations, both here in Australia and around the world. And I know people say this a lot now, but we are definitely self-confessed data nerds. We're obsessed with measurement and also driving results. Speaking today, we've got Adam, Michelle, and Ryan. Adam is our strategist team lead. He's had a 6-year career in digital, 5 years working with not-for-profits. Adam is very much an all-rounder, having run all kinds of charity campaigns, fundraising, lead generation, and peer-to-peer. Michelle is a digital strategist here at Digital Ninjas. She has a 4-year career in digital. She has worked for 5 years with social enterprises and not-for-profits. She is very passionate about youth organizations and is quite community and mission focused. And then we also have Ryan, who's a digital strategist here. He's had a 6-year career in digital with 3 years working with not-for-profits, both here in Australia and in the UK. Ryan loves all things digital marketing, but has a little bit more of an affinity towards SEO. As far as what we're going to talk about today, we're going to go through the battle plan. We'll talk about the state of play in the market right now, why tax time is so important, and a market strategy. We'll go through the different tools you can use when you're promoting your tax appeal. That'll include email and SMS, Google Grants, paid search, paid social, and also what data you need. And then we'll tell you how to optimize your campaigns, how to manage the budget, how to optimize your landing page, and how to use urgency, not just at the end, but throughout the campaign. And then we'll close up with a bit of a summary. I encourage everyone to participate openly. I will be manning the chat throughout our presentation, so feel free to ask questions throughout. Where I can, I'll respond straight away. If the response requires a little bit more of a lengthy response, then what we're going to do is we'll take the questions and we'll put the Q&A on a landing page on our website, which we'll share after the webinar. Right, now I'll pass it over to a team of much younger and more interesting people. Over to you, Adam.
Cool. I don't know about that fee, but thank you. So yeah, before we get into the battle plan, we're going to begin with a quick question. So as Fee mentioned, please use the chat functionality at the bottom of your screen. But the first question today that we've got is, what percentage of annual revenue do Australian NFPs typically generate during the end of financial year? So we've got A, 12%, B, 22%, C, 39%, and then D, 51%. I'll give you all around 30 seconds to a minute just to put through some responses. And you can see on the bottom of the screen, that's where you should hopefully be able to see the chat functionality on your screen. Okay, it looks like the chat is currently disabled. So yes, I can see people using the Q&A function. So please use that for the time being. You can see some answers coming through. But yes, use Q&A, please. Apologies for that.
Cool.
Okay, I can see a few Ds, a few Cs, a few As, lots of variety. Okay, perfect. So it definitely varies between each and every organization, but the answer is actually B. So the average charity raises around 22% of their annual revenue during end of financial year. So this is why it's such an extremely important time, and it's really important that you're putting your best foot forward with your upcoming campaign. And I'm sure that's why a lot of you are actually here today. So why is end of financial year such a profitable time for organizations? Well, unlike other times in the year where deadlines are often quite fabricated, June 30 marks the last day in the financial year for Australians to reduce their taxable income. That is why many organizations will often frame tax as a rational rather than an emotional appeal. So although it's definitely important to capitalize on this rational element, especially towards the tail end of June, it's important not to neglect the emotional and storytelling element of your campaign, which can be really important in helping differentiate your appeal from other organizations. So given how dependent many organizations are on June for revenue, it's not surprising that the market has become overloaded with advertising efforts. This is not just from charities, but also retailers. You'll see plenty of ads for Officeworks as well as Toyota. So almost every brand under the sun has a campaign in June. This year, it's also really important to consider the financial pressures impacting many households. So as all of you may or may not know, you probably do, the RBA has recently delivered its second consecutive interest rate hike, and consumers are being faced with record high energy prices. I think even this morning I saw petrol at 250, so really, really insane prices there. So although these factors are impacting many people's back pockets, many Australians will still make a donation. Really, what's important about these two things is that your campaign stands out from the rest of the market. So before we get into the specifics of best practices, it's really valuable to see the variety of activity in the market. As you can see here, we've got a few different organizations and their activity in 2025. We can see their level of spend, their ROAS, which is their return on ad spend, whether they were running a gift match or not. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in today's session. And then some of the campaigns or channel types that they were running in the campaign. So as you can see, there's a massive amount of variety here. Some organizations are spending a few $1,000s, while others are spending a few $100,000. Some organizations are running multi-channel campaigns, while others are running on just one or two. And then some organizations are leveraging a gift match to increase ROAS, while others can perform quite well without one. So while it's really great to see what's out there in the market, it's important to also look at key internal factors. So this is things like your organization's awareness, your digital maturity, so whether it's your first or 10th digital campaign, and the proposition as a whole. Considering these factors are vital when setting your own internal targets. So as I've mentioned, there's plenty of factors, both internal and external, and these will influence your campaign. That said, we've run multiple end of financial campaigns over the years, and we have a number of takeaways which are important not to ignore. So firstly, multi-channel campaigns. So multi-channel campaigns often outperform campaigns that were run on just the one channel. This is really important. Budget must be taken into consideration when looking at this. Paid search can be useful to build demand, while paid search can then be used to capture that demand. But if your budget is too tight, a single channel campaign might be more effective. Hollywood production also isn't a must. So when it comes to creatives, high costs and high production assets are not a requirement. Often we actually see that less polished creatives can perform better and can actually be more effective in not only stopping users as they scroll on their feed, but also engaging them and then nurturing them to convert. When it comes to your own organization, though, we recommend testing a variety of creative styles to see what works best for you. Although different messaging styles are also important at different points in the appeal, we'll talk about that in a few slides' time, it's also important to make sure you're tweaking your best performers rather than creating a completely new set of new suite of creatives. And as I mentioned, there's also plenty of advertising overload when it comes to June in particular, which impacts competitive bids. In June, we've even seen instances of cost per clicks exceeding $150. So when considering your search campaigns, ensure you're focusing on keywords that are most relevant to your organization and cause, and more importantly, that you have budget accommodated to allow for this increase in cost per click. In June, you might even see some of your keywords that performed really, really well in May or early June are too costly and are not sustainable to continue running, particularly in those final 2 weeks. And this one, super, super important, especially in the most recent few years, owning your brand. So with exact match keywords now becoming looser and looser in terms of what they can match with, the introduction of AI Max for search campaigns, and also more advertisers using Performance Max, we're seeing incredibly higher chances of other organizations showing for searches for your brand. So make sure you're bidding on your own brand terms so you don't lose out on key donations at this key time. And then finally, test early. I mean, this is really dependent on your budget. So although June records the strongest performance, it's important to use May to understand what is working and what's not, and what can be scaled most effectively in June. So when it comes to the strategy, it is very similar to a romantic relationship. You should be using your head and your heart. So to capture the heart element, your campaign should clearly show why someone should donate to your organization at this very point in time. Realistically, if the urgency of the ask isn't clear, someone might consider other options which have a greater need. You should also leverage storytelling to clearly identify the impact a donor can have while simultaneously pulling on a user's heartstrings. On the other hand, though, with tax, a rational element definitely comes into play. Your campaign should capitalize on the urgency of June 30 and how a donation can reduce a user's taxable income. Elements like gift matching could also play a role in increasing performance, especially if a user is tossing up between two different asks, one where a gift match is in play and one where it isn't. So how do you balance the head and the heart? Well, that leads me to our next question. So again, please don't use the chat, use the Q&A function. But as you can see, here's the question. So,
Chat's working now too, though.
chat's working now. Okay. Revert back to chat. Ignore me. So what is the optimal messaging tone for the final 48 hours of June? A, educational storytelling. B, soft and indirect. C, brand awareness and history. And finally, D, transactional and urgent. Okay, I can see some A's, some D's, lots of D's actually. Let's give you another 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, as most of you said D, yes, that's correct. So the optimal messaging tone for the final 48 hours of June should revolve around the proximity to the June 30 deadline and be primarily transactional. That is not to say, though, that storytelling elements should not play a role, but they should not be front and center. So as we briefly discussed, timing is everything when it comes to a tax appeal. Not only does it influence your budget phasing, which Ryan will talk about in a little bit, but it will also influence the frequency of activity, like your SMS and your email campaigns. So here you can see the evolution of the campaign from foundational in May on the left and early June, through to conversion in the final few days on your right. Through all channels, activity in May and early June should focus on the heart, going to depth around the cause you're promoting and why users should consider donating. You should really be setting the scene for what's to come. From a paid digital perspective, this is a key time to test creatives, audiences, and keywords. These learnings will help ensure you've got your optimal mix in June when it counts the most. Mid-June, your messaging should shift to a greater focus and urgency and the June 30 deadline. You will still have some emotional elements in your asks, but there should be a definitive focus on tax-specific messaging. You may want to introduce the tax calculator here to get people thinking about how a donation to your organization could lead to tax savings. More on that in a bit. The final phase will become largely transactional, especially on email and SMS. With your paid campaigns, the second and final stage may actually be merged into one, especially given that creators with just a few hours or even days of runtime will not have much data behind them without decent budgets. So now let's look at how this might look from a paid social perspective. So here we can see a bit of an example from WWF, and we can see this transition of messaging from the left all the way to the right. So on the first image on the left, we can see the heart at play. The ad clearly highlights the importance of donating to help prevent tiger extinction. There is some tax messaging here, but really it's quite minimal. We can then see a clear shift towards the head with the second and third images. Ad copy has also shifted towards a clear focus and urgency and making a tax deductible gift. You can really see this in the first line of the primary text at the very top of the ad. In images 2 and 3, WWF have also leveraged assets which ran in the first phase of the appeal. The organization has added a simple last chance text overlay rather than create an entire new suite of assets. This could be an approach worth considering in your organization, especially to save time and resources. Similarly, we can see the shift of messaging in Greenpeace's campaign here. In the foundational phase, the first ad introduces the urgency of the ask with emotional framing around preventing shark extinction. In the transitional phase, in the middle, messaging then shifts to a focus on urgency and making a tax-deductible gift. Similar to WWF, we can see here that the headline underneath the image, "Help Protect the Ocean," has shifted to a Donate by June 30 headline. Simple elements like a clock in the ad copy and also the creative are great at feeding to that element of urgency too. So something to consider here. Unlike WWF, you can see Greenpeace has also created specific creatives to run just on June 30, some last day messaging. This could also be an approach for your organization if you have a decent budget that will allow your ads to exit the learning phase in a short period of time. If not, this might be suitable for you. So as I've mentioned, gift matching is one of the greatest contributors to campaign performance. Although match giving can significantly increase a campaign's performance, it is not to say that you can't have a high-performing campaign without one. Gift matches can be an effective way to differentiate your organization from other organizations in such a competitive time like June. For those of you who might not know, gift matching is a strategy that usually involves a corporate partner or high-value donor matching donations made by individuals to the charity up to a certain amount, like $10,000. Often, this is 1-for-1, but there are some more generous or even extreme versions, which is $1 for $2 or even $3. When gift matching is in play, conversion rates often increase significantly and average gift size grows. All up, as you can imagine, this can have a massive impact on your campaign's return on ad spend. We've seen gift matches work successfully at multiple points in a tax campaign. Some have worked really, really well in the final week, while others have actually performed quite better early on in June or mid-June. So there's no singular time that you must have a gift match running in the market. So although gift matching is often well understood in fundraising circles, it's really important to take a step back and note that the everyday person might actually not know how they work. So when using match giving, it's important to simplify the messaging in your ads so potential donors can understand what impact they can truly have. And here we can see a few good examples from the Victor Chang Cardiac Research Institute on the left, Greenpeace in the middle, and UNICEF on the right. So another consideration for your tax appeal is tax calculators. And tax calculators definitely feed into the head part of the strategy we talked about earlier. In most instances, users enter in their tax bracket and the donation amount into the calculator. Once done, this gives an estimate of how much they could potentially save by donating. In this bottom example here on the right, a donation of $10,000 would lead to an actual cost of just $5,300. What is really great about tax calculators, though, is that they can reduce cognitive load. And by that, we mean users don't have to think a whole lot. Tax calculators can also act as a nice hook to donating. Often, the pre-filled amount from the calculator can then fit into a donation form, simplifying the journey. So although we've seen mixed results from promoting tax calculators in paid activity, they can be effective in your email, organic, and even Google Grant strategy. So don't rule them out for your upcoming campaigns.
So now let's talk about segmentation because this is where most end of financial year campaigns either fly or die. So one of the biggest mistakes we see is people running the same ad to everybody. We have got three distinct groups from your CRM, and each one should be a separate custom audience with different messaging, different objectives, and different creatives. So with your lapsed donors, these are people who've given at some point, but then they stopped. We found that research done by the Fundraising Effectiveness Project in 2025 shows that one-time donor retention is at just 19.2%. So that means over 80% of donors don't actually come back, which is scary, but then at the same time, it's a great opportunity because once they've already converted once, that means they're your highest value retargeting pool. You want to upload them as a custom audience in your platforms such as Meta and Google. And then the approach and ad messaging for this group is reactivation. So think of language like, we missed you, or your past support made X possible. Come back before June 30th. You want to keep the ask low for this group. Think $25, not $500, for example. You want to reopen that relationship, not maximize the gift. And really important as well when you're thinking of things in a digital ad space, you want to be able to exclude this audience from your prospecting campaigns so that they're not seeing cold acquisition creatives when they should be receiving a more personalized return message. Your active donors, these are people who've given in the last 12 months. They don't really need to be convinced of your cause. They just need a reason to act now. This is what Adam was referring when was talking about match giving. This would be your key match giving audience. We know that announcing a match increases the probability of donating by 22% and revenue per salutation by 19%. And we've seen with double the donations data that says matching and appeals increases response rate by 71% and average gifts by 51%. So that's a really big deal. So in your ad creatives, you want to lead with the match as Adam has shown with the previous examples. So think of your $50 becomes 100 before June 30th. But if you don't have a match partner, you want to make sure you are leading with the text deadline and the upgrade ask. These are your warm audience, so your CPAs should be significantly lower than your prospecting campaigns, and you want to make sure you are budgeting accordingly. With your high value donors, this differs by organizations, but for simplicity's sake, let's say these are your $1,000 plus givers. So if you are running any paid activity for this segment, it should be highly personalized. So you want to think of things like a dedicated landing page with tailored ask, or suppressing them from prospecting ads and routing them towards your major gifts team to handle that high value donor. And here's where everything starts connecting to prospecting. Each of these segments, lapsed, active, and high value, they can become custom audiences in your different platforms. Those custom audiences end up becoming lookalikes or similar audiences, and the quality of your prospecting audiences is directly tied to the quality of your segmentation. Pretty much rubbish in, rubbish out. We've now built our segments, and those segments double as data for prospecting campaigns. Now let's look at the tools that turn those seeds into donors. So you have your Advantage Plus on Meta, which is Meta's machine learning doing the heavy lifting. You want to upload your active donor list or your high value segments as custom audiences, set it as audience suggestions, and Advantage Plus uses that as a starting signal to find new people who behave like your existing donors. There is a caveat. A key requirement is you need to have sufficient conversion data for this. So Meta recommends approximately 50 conversion events per week per ad set to really optimize properly. If you are a smaller organization and thinking of using Advantage Plus and you're not hitting that 50 conversions per ad set threshold, you want to optimize towards a softer event first. So a landing page view or donation page initiation, then you want to shift towards more of a purchase optimization once you've built enough signals. The advantage over traditional interest-based targeting is that it removes the guesswork and you are not deciding who your audience is based on assumptions. You're letting the algorithm find patterns across thousands of signals you would never identify manually. Performance Max on Google, that is Google's equivalent play of Advantage Plus on Meta. It runs across search, YouTube, display, and discover from a single campaign. For end of financial year, Performance Max is powerful because it captures intent across the full funnel. So somebody sees a display ad in mid-May, then at some point they search up tax deductible donation. PMax connects those dots. And the important thing with PMax is your asset groups. So think of your multiple headlines, your descriptions, your images, and ideally video as well. The algorithm then tests combinations, so quality and variety of inputs directly impacts performance. And you want to upload your custom lists, so your lapsed, your high value segments there. And you want to also connect your website visitors as audience signals. So similar logic to Advantage Plus, is just a different ecosystem. Lastly, with audience scaling, if your donor list is under 1,000 contacts, you really don't have enough data for a high quality lookalike or similar audience because that set is too small. In that case, you want to pivot to broad targeting and let your creative do the segmentation work. So when your data can't define your audience, your messaging has to. This is one of the most important tactical frameworks in this whole session. The old way of doing things that we've seen in the past on different platforms is you'd build an audience, you write an ad for that audience, and then you would run the campaign. The new way of doing things and what the algorithms are really pushing, particularly with Advantage Plus, is one campaign, broad targeting, multiple ad sets with distinct creative themes, and the algorithm figures out who responds to what. Why does this work? In Meta specifically, the system now optimizes at a creative level, not just an audience level. Meta's testing across 31 advertisers found Advantage Plus delivered a 17% CPA reduction and a 32% return on ad spend lift versus when people created their own manual campaigns. That is e-commerce data, but the principle still holds for nonprofits today is consolidation with diverse creatives always outperforms manual audience segmentation. So here's an example structure that we've put up for you guys. You have one Advantage Plus campaign. You have 3 ad sets, each put around a different motivational angle. And then within each ad set, there's 3 formats: video, static image, and carousel. That gives the algorithm maximum surface area to test which combination of message and format works for which audience. The 3 angles, for example, cause-driven, speaks more towards empathy and values alignment. So the video here would be more so around emotive storytelling. So you want to think short, raw, human. You don't want to overproduce it, as Adam had mentioned earlier on. You don't want that Hollywood style production. Your static images, you want to lead with a more visual and single bold statement about the problem. So one message, one image, one CTA. Your carousel, you want to tell the story sequentially. So you want the problem, who's affected, what you do about it, and then the ask. Everything in this ad set should make the donor feel something before you ask them to do anything. Your impact speaks more towards pragmatism and tangible outcomes. Here, your video should show proof. So think of your testimonials, your programs in action, a staff member explaining what, for example, $50 actually funds. And then your static image, you want to make sure it is direct and specific. So $50 provides 10 meals, or $100 funds 3 hours of crisis support. The donor should understand the value exchange in under 2 seconds. Your carousel walks through the impact ladder at different giving levels. So on that first carousel, you want to be talking about $20 does X. On like a third carousel, you want to be like $100 does OY. That format lets donors self-select as they swipe. In your community angle, you want to speak more towards belonging and social proof. Social proof is one of the 6 core principles of persuasion, and it's really powerful when you pair it up with a deadline. So that is why tax season is always a great time to drive that message. Your video here should showcase collective action and real momentum. Your image should lead with numbers that create a bandwagon effect. So think of join 15,000 Australians making a difference this tax time. Your carousel showcases donor voices or milestones. Everything you use should be centered around a we language and not a you. But overall, a critical rule I really want to emphasize is you don't want to duplicate messaging across assets or your audiences. Each one is a distinct psychological entry point. So, for example, if your cause-driven static ad and your impact given static ad are saying the same thing with different images, you're creating internal competition, you're not testing. If you do follow a framework like this, after a week of spend, you want to look at the data, you want to ask yourself the questions, which angle is converting at what cost? And then in terms of the timeline of events, that is your main testing phase paying off so that by the last week of June, you're not guessing, you're scaling with what's proven. I can't talk about all of this without talking about data infrastructure. None of the strategies we are covering today would matter if your tracking isn't right at all. Usually people kind of zone out when I'm talking about this, but this is something I really, really want to emphasize that will cost you quite a bit if you do ignore it. You want to make sure that your GA4 events are firing. So is the donation success event firing on your thank you page with the transaction value? Not just firing, but you want to make sure that dollar amount is showing on your GA4 because without it, you can't calculate return on ad spend and neither can Google's bidding algorithm. So you want to make sure you make a test donation and check the real-time report. If it's not there, you want to make sure you fix before you spend anything during tax. Your tracking pixels, similar question. Are your purchase and donation events firing with value parameters? Without it, your pixel, for example, Meta will only optimize for volume, not quality. So that will mean that whatever purchases people are making through Meta, you're only getting very, very small donations when you need meaningful ones. So you want to make sure that your value amounts is tracking properly within Meta or whatever other tracking pixels you have. You can use tools like the Pixel Helper from Chrome extensions to make sure that these pixels are firing correctly for Meta. With your UTMs, you want to make sure everything has consistent parameters. So every ad, every channel, your email, your referrals, pretty much across everything, you want to make sure you do have consistent parameters. The most common mistake in a digital standpoint is we see, for example, your UTM source is Meta with a small M for Meta in one campaign, and then you have another campaign with your UTM source with a capitalized M for Meta, you'll be surprised that GA4 actually treats this as two different sources. You need to make sure that everything to the capitalizations of letters is consistent and the same so that your attribution isn't fragmented and you can actually compare channel performance. So make sure you're standardizing and documenting everything before launch so that you know what UTMs are for what channel, for what campaign, and across your whole marketing stack. Your Google Tag Manager container or GTM container, you want to make sure that those key tags are firing. So your GA4 tags, your tracking pixels tags, your meta pixel, and any other conversion pixels. And you want to make sure that your retargeting events are set up so you can build audiences of donation page visitors. So when people see an ad, they come to your landing page, they don't convert, you're going to be able to retarget those people so that they convert at a later stage. Industry data consistently shows retargeted visitors convert at a significantly higher rate, but you can only retarget if the events are firing. And lastly, I really want to emphasize consent mode. It is a silent killer. If this isn't set up correctly, your entire ad tracking stacks will break without anybody noticing. It will look like your ad stopped converting when in actuality, there's an implementation issue. And I'll go over that in more detail. So here's a scenario we need to talk about because it does catch a lot of organizations more than you'd expect. An organization implements Google Consent Mode. They set the default state to denied for analytics and advertising cookies, but then they don't implement a consent banner. So there's no mechanism for users to come to your page and grant consent that, hey, you can advertise to me. So every visitor arrives, consent will stay denied for the entire session. So what happens when with that specific scenario? GA4 switches to cookieless pings and modeled data. So you don't lose everything, but your conversion data becomes significantly less accurate and underreported. Your revenue figures in your reports will no longer reflect reality. And on the meta side of things, if your pixel is gated behind consent and you don't have conversion API running server side, those events will stop firing entirely. Your ad platform loses the signal it needs to optimize. It can't learn who your donors are if it can't see the conversions. The dangerous part is it will always look like there's something wrong with the campaigns. There's an issue with ad performance, with creatives. You're spending money, reported conversions drop, and the instinct is usually for when this happens is for people to pause or reallocate campaigns when the problem isn't actually the ads, it's the tracking layer underneath them. So the correct setup has three components. First, your default state is set to denied on page load. Second, a consent banner from a CMP like Quickiesbot, OneTrust, or Compliance that gives users a clear choice. Third, the consent update that fires when the user accepts changing that state to granted. So once people consent when they land on your landing page and is set to granted, your tags start collecting that full data. But if any of those three is missing, you're running campaigns on degraded data at best or blind at worst. So you want to make sure that before your end of financial year campaigns go live, use an incognito browser, go to your donation page and do 3 checks. Does the consent banner appear? When you accept, does GA4 show events in real time? Does your tracking pixel, for example, your meta pixel, fire after a test donation? If the answer is no for any one of these things, you want to make sure you're fixing that and addressing that problem head on. Your ads can't optimize toward conversions that they can't actually see. I can see that there's a lot of things going up in the chat. We have a text appeal checklist here for you guys to download, which will go through the readiness. Are you ready for your text appeal there? So feel free to scan this. We'll also show it towards the summary slides, so you can always scan there as well.
Great. Now to cover the channels that you'll likely be using in your end of financial year campaigns, or at least should be prioritizing: email, SMS, and digital ads. So first up, we'll cover email. So setting targets is always good. And in terms of open rate, this depends on your email lists. So when targeting a warm list of donors during this highly engaged period where they've likely seen your other marketing activities, we'd say that 65% is a good and realistic target. And then any cold outreach will be lower, usually towards 20 or 22%. And with the existing donors, so these will be the main focus for end of financial year, rather than having a large focus on new donor acquisition. That's usually more throughout the year in terms of building up donor lists. So with existing donors, they still need warming up, and then obviously building up to build that urgency towards the final ask in the final few days. So starting in May, warming up by introducing your campaign, introduce the story and the key messages of your campaign, and then the main ask, which is obviously to get donations and for donors to get the tax benefits. So then with this warming up stage, that's when you're interacting with your audience to remind them of the brand, the work you do, and then you'll be in the front of mind when any decision is made. Then there's slowly increasing that urgency. So introducing messaging with deadlines, matched giving throughout the campaign, and the value of the donation. So the impact this donation makes, things like that. And then in those final few days, there's the final ask. That then needs to be quite timely. Not too soon, but then enough time for action to be taken before that June 30 deadline. So we usually recommend within the final 2 or 3 days. And then looking at the current trends in email. So most emails are opened on mobile. So email optimization should always bear this in mind. With a clean minimalist layout, not to overcrowd the screen, and then having touch-friendly CTAs that allow the user to scroll through the email, but then also easily take action when they hit the CTA button. If you have any donor lists that have like organization emails in there, then it's good to try and separate these out so then you can build more of a desktop-focused email because it's more likely to be open on desktop. And then with this, you can also differentiate the language and tailor the email a bit more in terms of like the donation ask amounts that you might want to put in there. As Michelle mentioned earlier, segmentation is key for optimizing results. So especially in separating lapsed donors from active donors and high-value donors, but even in terms of what sort of audience you're reaching, like general donors versus organizations. And then this segmentation can be further personalized. So this can be done through PURLs, which are personalized URLs. These are smart targeted pages that are just a customizable landing page. And this is for each user or for each user group. And then you can customize the page to, like, say, match the donation form to the user expectation. So this is using existing data from those existing data lists. And where a donor might have previously donated, say, $200, then this can pre-fill that as a standard amount and variables around that, rather than what the regular campaign ask may be, which could be $10, $20, $60. And things like this then allow you to maximize the conversion value just by converting users based on their previous activity. And having that engagement also helps increase the conversion rate because it might meet the expectation of the user rather than fall short of their expectations. And then in terms of KPIs, so KPIs for email should take into consideration the sort of recent Apple email privacy protection, which artificially opens the email before the user can, so that you can scan the email for safety purposes. This is often considered with most email platforms now, so then obviously has an impact on the open rate and inflates it a bit more than it should. In these cases, you'll see that the open rate immediately shoots up. So emails are immediately opened by the Apple email privacy protection. And then you'll see second opens by some of the users later on, which is the actual interaction. But yeah, it's just important to keep this in mind in terms of setting realistic KPIs for emails. And now onto SMS. So everyone checks mobile notifications, especially an SMS message. Often we'll open the text just to remove the notification or to read the entire message if you can't see it just from the notification, hence the 98% open rate. So these are the most direct form of contact outside of calling someone, but unlike a call, people are likely to open a text from an unknown number. If, like me, you see a call from a number rather than a name, then you'll just leave it go to voicemail. But with an SMS, I just always get drawn in to read the entire message. And then with SMS, obviously, that's right at your fingertips. So I've opened that message and I'm engaging with the content. SMS gets you right to the fingertips of the user, which during this period, end of financial year, that's exactly where you want to be. So then within that message, it's about creating an engaging CTA, encouraging the user to interact with it. And then the URL they click through, having that has personalized URL that encourages donations. And now from there, you should have a user that is now quite a very warm prospect. And then staying on the theme of SMS, so two-way SMS is also something that can help warm up the audience. So this is all about brand perception and reputation and helps build that relationship with the user. So asking a user to reply with their opinions, their questions, any sort of input, this just builds the trust that their words are impactful and considered by the brand. So having conversational interactions just feels a lot more natural. These can even be asking a potential donor how much they'd consider donating or how much they think it costs to perform XYZ, whatever your campaign is focused around. And then this shows them what their donation can help cover. This then increases engagement, warms up the prospect even further, and allows to build that connection, but also can be used to build that urgency. So if they have any questions around the date that they have to donate by, as Adam mentioned earlier with the tax calculator, it could be things like that. And the guidelines for SMS. So SMS expectations should be set early on with the sign up. A simple opt-in or opt-out is good. Although SMS is a great tool for building a relationship, having unwanted or unknown texts can also break that. And then similarly with the cadence, this is also very important. You need to be in the thought process of the user, end user, when they're making the decision, but not that you've annoyed them with constant messaging or with over communication. Then, as I just said, response mechanisms are important. Having this open conversation using reply options just allows the user to feel a bit more valued. And then the sender ID, so building the trust with the sender ID, like I said, not just an unknown number, but a familiar brand. And then shorter URLs. So shorter URLs make the SMS more readable. It looks better on the screen, but weary users will often avoid a URL that looks suspicious, which small URLs often do, especially because they're not branded. This is just basic cybersecurity training that we're all told to avoid. And we're quite aware of that at Digital Ninjas. So we have the capabilities to try and combat this issue by allowing brand visibility within that shortened URL. And then there's the transactional SMS. So a transactional SMS from the start, when that initial donation is made, sets that expectation and tells the user that they have this form of communication set up, their data is in the database, and they will probably receive SMS notifications in the future, but allowing them to also alter this if desired. Now, moving on to the digital ads. So starting with paid search and grants. Utilising your grant account is always recommended, although they tend to struggle to compete at end of financial year in terms of donations. Some still trickle through, but broad awareness of the campaign and the brand, this can be generated through brand and just general cause-related search terms. And then this is where your paid budget comes in. So paid search can then focus on the high intent keywords and help convert that warmed up traffic. Equally with search campaigns and your PMX campaigns, it's important to refine this traffic. So building out lists of keywords that you don't really want to waste budget on. You may have got these learnings from the grant account, but there'll be keywords throughout the campaign that generate a lot of interest and a lot of traffic, but maybe don't convert, or they're just not high intent enough to convert. And then equally, it might just be that they're spending a lot of budget without high CPC or high CPA. And then onto social ads. So particularly, we're going to focus on Meta here, as that tends to be the channel of choice for end of financial year. Social ads are just naturally going to generate a bit more brand awareness just due to the reach that they have, the frequency that they're shown across channels. So having a brand awareness campaign doesn't really need to be too much of a focus with Meta. It's more about prioritizing the campaign objective to sales or conversions. And then this will help narrow down that traffic and start working to get those donations flowing in. Then in terms of the creative, I know we've touched on this quite a bit throughout, and especially with Meta now being very creative-led. Ad blindness on social media obviously exists, so it's good to test different creatives, keep the assets fresh throughout, or at least make sure that you've got enough assets for rotation throughout the campaign, especially in changing creatives, or at least text overlays for different periods throughout the campaign, such as matched given events and other events. And then there's the visuals, so having that clear CTA within the image overlay that just catches the user's eye initially and immediately shows them what kind of ad they're interacting with. Now for another question. So how should the advertising budget be phased for a June appeal? A, spend everything in May. B, save 20 to 40% for those final 7 days. C, spend an equal amount daily. Or D, only spend on June 30th. Right, we've had quite a few responses coming in, and it looks like most people had it right with B, save 20 to 40% for those final 7 days. So the final 7 days is just when the audience is at its warmest. This is the highest intent period, really, where they're most likely to convert. And then saving the budget for this time just means you can reach more of that audience and just increase your campaign's potential or reach its full potential. So now on to the budget and optimizations. As we said, the final week will be key for reaching your target, with the majority of revenue often coming in this final week, and especially in those final few days. So the return on investment will take a sudden upwards trajectory in these final days. So it is important to trust your budgets. Make sure that you don't overcommit due to those early results. The early days can be a bit stagnant and scary, and you might be tempted to just push a bit more budget in, but it's just trusting what you know. And then if you are running smaller budgets, then this final period should be the main focus of your campaign. So condensing the campaign into those final 4 weeks rather than running a full 6 to 12 week campaign. And then there's things like matched giving. So matched giving as part of the campaign, as we've said, that tends to be one of the most engaging times as well. Matched giving just really taps into the donor's mindset and encourages them to increase the donation amount that they were considering, but also encourages them to donate within that time frame. And then there's email and SMS. So obviously this is a lot more affordable and cheaper than running digital ads. You just have to pay the platform fee a lot of the time. So email and SMS timing throughout the campaign is essential, especially in terms of running ad budget as well. So having the email and SMS going out at key times within the campaign. So this lets users know that your campaign has started, gives them a bit further info further on into the campaign, a bit more information about your ask, your brand, all of this, and then what their donation contributes towards. But also you can use it to make them aware of any upcoming matched given events, a matched given launch, and then those final day pushes where you might want to send an email for each of those final 2 or 3 days. And then there's mobile optimization. So optimizing to where your users are, which, as we discussed, they tend to be on mobile. So this is where they're going to be clicking from. So it's making sure that you're personalizing everything to this. As we covered, mobile is just where everyone's at. So making sure the landing page, emails, ads, everything is set up to accommodate the majority of the audience, especially if you can't really split out audience or different audience lists. It's best to focus on mobile. And now performing a donation page audit. So the donation page should be quite simple. You want enough information about why people are donating, and then simple imagery that just shows the impact of their donation. The forms should be quite easy to navigate, especially on mobile, and then simple and quick to donate. So using autofill through the personalized URLs, where you just automatically input the user's data because you have it from being in your database, or there's quick donations through things like Apple and Google Pay. And then to the form, so this should be quite simple. The form just needs to be a few simple steps to get the user from landing on the page to finally completing that form as quickly as possible. Every extra step that you add in there will just see users drop off. And then there's keeping that urgency factor on the landing page. So having a countdown timer or even like a progress bar to show the user the urgency of having them on that page. It's that their time is running out to make the impact needed and also to benefit from the tax-deductible donation, but also showing them with the progress bar that their contribution is getting the organization closer to that final goal. And now there's how to remove all of the friction. So digital interface in all settings should be easy to use, from the email, SMS, the ad that they click, to the form on the landing page. Getting the user over the line in less than a minute should be the goal, so simplicity is key here. In terms of CTAs, thinking mobile first will optimize conversions, with most users likely clicking through emails and SMS on mobile and also seeing social ads on their phone. Then there's the post-donation friction, which is more reputation focused. So having that instant text or email confirmation with the donation receipt marks the end of the customer journey, and it needs to be a pleasant experience for them. So this should be instant or at least quite timely. You don't want to be leaving the user refreshing their emails, just waiting for that receipt. This is important to remember that their transaction is also a benefit for them. So having that tax receipt is often the goal. Then there is the urgency friction. So real-time countdowns should be used to convenience the user, showing them that they need to take action within the time to really benefit and maximize the value of their donations. Anything after June 30 doesn't benefit them for quite a while. And now on to optimizing the campaign. So end of financial year is a fast-moving time, and the campaigns are also fast-moving. So follow what the data is telling you and adapt the campaign accordingly. This being in terms of converting search terms. So then there's also those that need to be removed, and the search term is taking up a lot of spend with lower ROI. So being on top of this and probably checking the campaign each day. Some of you might want to go in every couple of hours as well, just to keep the campaigns on track, especially in those final weeks. Then there's also the placements. So the placements will also need to be considered across social media and Google channels. It's about making those quick calls to remove those placements that just have a low return on ad spend or just aren't converting, because you don't want to be wasting any money where showing ads where people aren't really interacting them. And then there's the creatives. So creatives are the main focus for end of financial year campaigns more often than not. Like Michelle said, creatives are now what Meta optimizes towards. So it can be difficult to adapt creatives quickly within the space of an end of financial year campaign. So this is more about utilizing previous year learnings and what's worked in your other campaigns throughout the year, and then building out as many variants as you can, really, so that the campaign has everything at the start that it wants to test with. So those are your three main tools to utilize for end of financial year. We have email, SMS, and digital ads. I'll now hand you back to Adam, who's going to discuss everything we've talked about here today to maximize your results.
Thanks, Ryan. I'll keep it quick, very conscious of time. It is 2:01, so plenty of information there, but these are really the key points you should be considering with your appeal. So as we know, it's a key time in terms of generating that revenue. So making sure you're planned and also making sure that your campaigns stand out across the market. Messaging is really critical throughout the appeal as well. So make sure you're focusing on the heart early on in May and shifting towards that head messaging later on in the campaign itself. Gift matching is definitely a key consideration. We've seen it drive considerable increases in revenue and return on ad spend, so make sure you are considering it in this campaign. As Ryan touched on, email and SMS are great ways to engage with your existing database, so make sure they do form a part of your entire plan. In terms of smart advertising, we've seen Google and Meta have increased some new campaign types and settings which can leverage AI. And we have seen that these can drive positive results. So definitely worthwhile considering that in your campaign this end of financial year. And then as Ryan touched on as well, make sure you're removing friction. So streamlining from the landing page to checkout, and also making sure you have tools like mobile payment wallets like Apple and Google Pay, just to streamline that entire journey and minimize drop-off. That's it. So thank you all for your time. You've got the QR code here on the bottom right where you can download that checklist. We will be putting together a blog with any questions which came through from today's session and posting on our website. And we will be shooting a link through as well. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Any more questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll answer them on the landing page. We will include a recording that will be coming through in the next 24 hours. Any questions I didn't get to? I think there was a handful of them. I will pop them on the landing page. A few people asked about SMS platforms. We definitely have that to share as well, which I'll share in the follow-up. Leave the chat open a bit longer in case there's any more questions. Thanks, Miranda. Yep, we'll send a recording through to everyone. Okay, I think we'll end it there. Thank you everyone for attending. If you're still here. Thanks, Ryan and Michelle. Chat to you soon.